Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands. Just a quick note before we get into today's episode. In the recording, we noticed there was a little distortion with one of our mics that may lead to a little trouble hearing some of the words, but we loved the conversation that we had with Seth, and we wanted to make sure everybody got to hear it. Fear not, for the upcoming episodes, we have it fixed, and happy listening. On to the show. Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where we bridge the gap between academics and practical marketing. Every other week, we sit down and go deep behind some of our America's most successful brands. I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
And today we're visiting with Seth Stephens-Davidowitz, an economist and data scientist, New York Times bestselling author and keynote speaker. Let's get into it. So Seth, welcome. We're very excited to have you at Behavioral Science for Brands. How is the day going?
So far, so good. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. For our listeners at home, Richard and I are big fans of Everybody Lies and Don't Trust Your Gut, two books that hopefully will come up in today's conversation. But you have really made popular this idea of using big data to reveal maybe some more truth behind what people think and believe and do, maybe even more accurately than, let's say, nationwide omnibus surveys and the such. So we'll talk more about that. But you have a new project that has just gone live, Who Makes the NBA? Can you tell us a little bit about the book and the inspiration for the project?
Yeah, so my first two books, Everybody Lies and Don't Trust Your Gut. Richard will know this. Writing books is a huge pain in the butt. It's not fun. It's laborious. It's long. It's frustrating. Sometimes you feel like, was the return worth it? So each of my first two books took, I would say, about 3 years of largely full-time work. And I became obsessed with AI and particularly AI data analysis tools. And I'm like, things that were taking me 4 months were taking me 4 hours all of a sudden. So I'm like, oh my God, this is changing everything. So I challenged myself to write a book about NBA basketball, a good book, I think a great book, I hope a great book, in 30 days. So Who Makes the NBA was a kind of a feverish project, 30 days of pretty much 15-hour days, I would say. And I'm so happy with how it turned out. And it's just a passion project of mine, NBA basketball, but I also talk about how I used AI and data. And I think it'd be interesting to all kinds of people, and lots of fun facts like that. A 7-footer has a 1 in 7 chance of becoming an NBA basketball player,
Wow.
Which is just insane. I don't think there's any other genetic gift that gives you such great odds of becoming a multi-millionaire.
I was just going to say, because based on the American public, what were the chances? Not 1 in 700, not 1 in 7,000. Do you know what's the chance in general?
Yeah, it's about 1 in 43,000 on average. And if you're under 5'10", which is the average height, so I'm under 5'10", I'm 5'9" on my dating profile, and probably about 5'7" in real life. And so if you're under 5'10", you have a 1 in 3.8 million chance of becoming an NBA player.
Wow.
Amazing.
I love the fact that you've added 2 inches to your height on your dating profile. There's a brilliant book, and it might have a different name in America. In Britain, it's called Dataclysm.
Yeah,
by
Christian Rudder.
Where he talks about, I think it might be 2 inches, he says, you plot on OkCupid the average height of men, and then you compare it to the American population as a whole, and it's like a bell curve but just shifted along 2 inches. People are making a calculation of they want to edge it up but not so far enough that they're going to be caught out on the first date.
Yeah, I think it's actually a smart move. Initially, I'm kind of compulsively honest, despite being the author of Everybody Lies. I think I'm honest to a fault. And in my dating profile, I want to be very, very honest about my height, because I don't want to show up at a date and the person's like, what the hell is going on here? And then I realized that kind of women, I'm heterosexual, so women tend to subtract a couple inches. They kind of know the game, so you might as well just play the same game everyone else is playing.
So that's a wonderful thing. By telling a lie, you're being more accurate and honest.
In
Like
some
if you
ways,
say
yeah.
you're too taller, then they imagine you exactly are. That's brilliant. Yeah.
This is the danger of academics spending too much time going in circles. We can justify just about anything, but this is very funny, very funny. And I was watching an interview you did, Seth, recently. Before everybody thinks that you just fed ChatGPT all of your data and it wrote the entire book. For the marketers listening at home, could you tell them what you used AI for and what you did not use it for?
So good news for marketers who I think a big part of the marketer's job is writing. I have found that ChatGPT is a B writer, a B plus writer. And I think for a book author, for a marketer, you're not looking to be a B writer. You're looking to be an A plus writer to stand out from the crowd. So I wrote every line of the book. What I used ChatGPT for was the data analysis, and then also the art. I used Midjourney to create all the art, and then I used ChatGPT for in targeted ways in writing. So I'll give you an example. I decided, because as I've mentioned, I'm a little on the shorter side. I said it's so unfair. All the greatest NBA players in history, they're 7 feet, 7'2", 6'8", 6'10". I'm like, they have this unfair advantage. Who's the best player on a height adjusted basis? So why did I do this? What's the value of this? I have no idea. But for me, it was like the most fun I've ever had, because I'm like, let's see what even you out. The math behind it was really fun, and I think was really correct. And the number one height adjusted player of all time is a player by the name of Muggsy Bogues. He was 5'3" tall, and he wasn't the best NBA player, but he played 14 seasons at 5'3", and that's just an incredible achievement because of what a disadvantage being 5'3" is in the NBA. So then I'm like, I need to have a name for this ranking that I give everybody. So I want to name it Muggsies after Muggsy Bogues. How many Muggsies does everybody have? These are how many Muggsies Muggsy Bogues has. These are how many Muggsies Spud Webb has, Michael Jordan, etc. And then I'm like, that should stand for something. It should be an acronym. But I didn't know what it should be an acronym for, and I'm not good at coming up with acronyms. So I asked ChatGPT, Muggsies is my metric of how good players are on a height-adjusted basis. What can Muggsy stand for? And it came up with Muggsy stands for metric for understanding game, given sporting individuals, effectiveness, and size, which is mind-blowingly good acronym. Way better than anything I could have ever hoped to come up with. So I kind of had ChatGPT as a toolbox throughout my writing process for things like that.
Oh, that's a lovely example. There's an amazing study though that poses a bit of a problem potentially for people's prejudices, often known as the labour illusion, the illusion of effort. So Andrea Morales did a study back in 2005 where she recruits a group of people, shows them a list of houses, and all these people in the market for a house, and they all see 10 houses. And sometimes she says to them, look, the estate agent, the realtor, I think as you call them, took 1 hour to pull this list together and they used a computer. Other times she tells people the estate agent did it manually and it took them 9 hours. She then gets every participant to rate the quality of the realtor, estate agent, and she finds that you see a very marked difference. If people think the estate agent put low effort in, they rate the estate agent at 50 out of 100. If they think the realtor put lots of effort in, they rate that person at 68 out of 100. So you get this 36% improvement. Now, everyone is seeing exactly the same quality of houses that meet their requirements to a certain degree. But people have this prejudice of if low effort has been put in, therefore they assume it's lower quality. Do you have a bit of a dilemma here? Because as you've shown, using AI and shortening that writing window from 3 years to a much shorter time, it sounds like it's given you phenomenal new insights and great stuff to talk about. But if people harbour this skepticism of time efficiency, how do you get over that? Have you addressed that head on, or have you made it? Have you lent into the uniqueness of what you've been doing?
So, Richard, that's a great question. So initially, I didn't know about this study, maybe, because I'm like, I want to show everyone that people are going to think this is so cool. Look what I did in 30 days. So I had on the cover, book written in 30 days. And I was really proud of it. I'm like, this is kind of a unique hook. And then I got that feedback from a lot of people. I don't want to read something created in 30 days. And I think that's unfair, because I think because of if prior to AI, if I said I wrote a book in 30 days, people would be correct that that's just a vanity project. Would be, not a very good book. But because of AI, I think you can write a great, treatise on basketball in 30 days. I think it is interesting that it can be done so quickly. But because I got that feedback, I changed the cover and I took out the 30 that I had written in 30 days. Because I did get that response, exactly as the study said, that people didn't want to read something that was, low effort. To be fair, it wasn't, I worked all the time. Like, it was 30 days of full-time work.
Yeah. I was very conscious as I was going through the Morales study. I don't want to label this as low effort. That's how she defines the two scenarios. Yeah.
One of the things I found out recently is that I have ADHD, and I didn't realize ADHD also comes with hyperfocus. So ADHD, if you're interested in something, you can focus like crazy, but if you're not interested in something, it's very, very hard to focus. So I think, I'm so interested in basketball and data that I could just work at a level that other human beings cannot work at. People can't sit in front of a computer for 14, 15, 16 hours a day doing data analysis and writing. But I did that, every day for, about roughly 30 days.
Your family and your girlfriend must have really enjoyed that 30-day period where you were obsessively engaged.
Well, my girlfriend is managing director in investment banking, so she can't really complain about my workaholism. That would be the pot calling the kettle black.
Got it. So for marketers, we can make this interesting question to be discussed later. If you're using AI, does the study Richard mentioned, does Seth's example apply to a lot of the work that marketers are doing? If consumers knew it was using AI, or it was able to be done in 4 hours, not 4 days, that changed the quality and the perception of the work. We have two really credible experiences here that say we got to be really thinking about how we brand using AI for marketers' work.
I have seen some brands try and deal this head on. Apologies, I never know if they're a brand that's global or UK based, but Itsu, it's a fast food Japanese restaurant in Britain anyway.
Yeah. And
they have the problem of they serve the food super quickly, so people assume it's not high quality. So they will have ads outside the restaurants, and it will say something on the lines of, "We've heard it takes 10,000 hours to generate a great skill. Our miso master has 744,000 hours." So they talk about the fact that the creator of the dish has, that's 70 years experience maybe, rather than the fact that it takes you 30 seconds to get the food once ordered. So I guess the analogy with writing would be, well, it's taken me 30 or 40 years to get to a stage to be able to write a book in 30 days. So I think there are workarounds potentially.
I remember Bob Dylan. I'm a huge music guy. Bob Dylan always used to brag about how quickly he'd write his songs. But he also said that, it was a lot of work to get to that point, years and years of training. But he'd be like, I wrote, Blowing in the Wind in 15 minutes or something. And he was really proud of that. And that it didn't seem to affect him. It kind of added to his legend, because I think so much of his legend, maybe if you already have a reputation as a genius, then it maybe adds to it if you can do something really, really quickly. Because I think Dylan, people love the idea of him being kind of otherworldly and, almost a different species above us. So I think, when he said that he could write these songs so quickly, it only added to the allure.
Absolutely. There's a story of a brand marketer. I'll put in the show notes. I'll bring it down. Where it was two big financial institutions coming together, and she creates the logo during the briefing meeting. And at the end, she hands it to the client. She said, "This is your new logo." He said, "We have a whole project that we have to do." And she said, "Yeah, it took me 30 years of experience and 5 minutes in the room." But that's the point. Like, you could be working on something for a very long time, and then you bring it to life when you're called upon to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And certainly my Who Makes the NBA project was many years of training in writing, in data science, in all kinds of things that allowed me to do it, very quickly. So along with the AI, which allowed me to do it very quickly.
Fantastic. When we're on the podcast, Seth, we often like to focus on practical applications from people's fields. And you've written brilliantly on how to use data to get to the truth. I know you're very skeptical about claimed data and sometimes social listening. What do you think are the best examples of businesses or brands using a creative technique to generate a truthful insight?
I'll give you one example. So Everybody Lies was my book about all the things you can learn about people from Google searches. And it has sections on, I was recently talking to a group of students and they said, "We loved your book, Everybody Lies. What we loved most about it was how vulgar it was." It's a bit of I mean, you guys are nodding along. It's compared to other books in the pop science space, it's a little more R-rated, I would say. Because I talk about
that rings a bell. I read it first at I think it was my son's sports day, and I was sitting there thinking, I really hope someone doesn't look over my shoulder. I might get arrested. So I'm nodding off that bit.
It has, it talks about sexuality and racism and lots of kind of taboo topics because it's all about all the secrets we can learn from new internet data sources. So after the book came out, I was kind of doing a lot of keynote talks. Speaking to businesses, business conferences. And I was speaking to a pension organization in Canada. And I go, "Oh God, what am I going to tell a pension organization? I research these forbidden topics, these, racism, porn. Like, I don't know anything about pensions." And they're like, "But you need to tell us something unique about pensions to give this talk." And I'm like, "Oh God, So I'm like, all right, I'll try to research something, pension porn. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I looked, what are the top questions people had about pensions in Canada? What are the top Googled questions people have about pensions? And the number one Googled question about pensions in Canada was, "What is a pension?" Which is both amusing, but also kind of profound. Yes. Because people who are selling pensions, there's a problem. You guys will know this well, the curse of knowledge. When you know something very well, it's very difficult to put yourself in the mindset of a beginner, someone who doesn't know the area as well as you. So a lot of people who are selling pensions are thinking, about the subtle details of their pension, and not that the number one question that people have about a pension is something as basic as what is a pension. So that I worked with them a little bit, and they kind of worked on almost dumbing down a little bit their advertising campaigns to greet their audience where they actually were. And I think it was actually a perfect example of the fact that we tell our secrets to Google. Even though it wasn't on a sexy, forbidden, taboo topic, I think a lot of people wouldn't admit, if you go to a focus group, what are your top questions about our product? They wouldn't say that they don't know what a pension is, because that would be embarrassing. But on Google, they ask that question. So it's a great example, I think, of kind of, the basic questions people have that they might not want to admit.
Yeah. I know it's a brilliant example. I guess it begs the question, though, why is it, if focus groups or surveys lead to misleading information, it's more about the image someone wants to project than the truth, why do you think so many companies or governments rely on that as a data source?
Well, I think surveys can have some use. I don't think there's no use ever to surveys. But I think, on some of these sensitive topics, they do border on the useless. I think it's just going to take time. Everything takes time it takes time for things to change. Definitely businesses more and more are relying on new tools, search listening, social listening. When Everybody Lies came out, which is already 7 years ago, it was considered like really shocking. Initially I was trying to be an academic, and I wrote all these papers using Google searches, and everyone's like, "What the hell is this? This isn't data. This isn't weighted. This isn't like what we can't do it. You can't do anything with this data." And now, there are probably thousands of papers a week using Google Trends data in academia, and there are businesses. When I first gave talks about Everybody Lies, I'd ask the audience how many people have heard of Google Trends. 2 hands would go up. Now every hand goes up. Google Trends is just part of the toolbox that any marketer, any person in business would have at their disposal. So I think it really is changing. Maybe not as fully as I'd prefer, because I think it could be used even more, but it's definitely been, I think there's been a pretty big transformation in the use of these digital tools in the past 7 years.
Yeah, and when Richard and I just finished another podcast talking about like data and how much data can be useful for marketers and brands, and how much it can be overwhelming and cause folks to get lost in the data. But one thing that's an easy connection from your story, Seth, is just if the data has something very clear to say, having the confidence, like the Canadian Pension Board, to do the easy answer. If people don't know what pensions are, no matter how highfalutin our creative is, no matter how fancy we are as a pension board, the first and foremost rule is we have to teach them what it is that we're talking about. That takes courage for a CMO to say that to his board. It takes courage for an agency to say that to their client, that, look, we got to cover the basics first. They don't know what this topic is. And it's exciting for people to hear that and get confidence in that.
Yeah, I think one thing I've noticed is a lot of people don't use data correctly, in my opinion, in that they use data to confirm what they wanted to do anyway. So, you have an idea, you kind of, there's some nerdy data scientists on this team. They can give us, evidence for our plan. And, you could torture data to tell you just about anything. So the correct use of data is to go in without a clear idea of what you're going to do and let the data make the decision for you. Sometimes for data science to really be powerful, it has to lead you to do things that you wouldn't have otherwise done. I'll give you another example of a power of data, also in Everybody Lies, is Walmart. They did a data analysis where they found that during hurricanes, or immediately after hurricanes, there was a huge increase in sales for strawberry Pop-Tarts in Walmart. They have no idea why that is, but to their credit, it was robust in the data. All the data scientists said, yeah, we've tested everything. Whenever there's a hurricane, people turn to strawberry Pop-Tarts, and Walmart stocked their shelves with more strawberry Pop-Tarts during hurricanes because that's what the data told them. And again, that's a great use of data. It wasn't like someone said, people sat around the table and said, I think we should have Rice Krispie treats during a hurricane. People would turn to that. And then data scientists find this. They said to their data scientists, tell us what products people are going to want during these, after a hurricane. And they found strawberry Pop-Tarts, and they said, we don't know why, but that's what the data tells us here. And they made a lot of money off of that.
That's a compelling, direct example for our brands and businesses. It's a great example. We have a Gardner study we'll drop in the show notes for everybody. I'll get the number wrong, but something like 63% of brand decision makers said the number one problem with data is it does not support the action we want to take. That is exactly what you're talking about, and we should be thinking about it in the inverse.
Well, yeah, that's the number one advantage of data, is that it sometimes tells us that we're making a mistake. But, I know this is just very, very hard. I self-published Who Makes the NBA, and I'm just really excited by turning this into my full-time job, just self-publishing books on sports. And I'm like, that is my dream because I love sports. I love writing. I hyper focus because of my ADHD. I'm like, if I could just do that all day, like I will be the happiest. It will be my dream job by far. And, I started looking at the data on like I was doing advertising and I noticed myself kind of torturing it to be like, this is working. This is giving me a positive ROI. When I, look close, I'm like, is this actually is this catching fire to the extent I think I want it to be catching fire? I have to force myself because I want to believe so strongly that this is a path. And I still, I'm trying to make it a path, but you have to admit, okay, maybe this isn't working. You have to do this different ad campaign. You have to change the cover. You have to do, change the copy. It's very hard sometimes to admit that something you believe very strongly needs a reboot, a retool, because we justify our laziness sometimes. I'd love to just sit back and let the version of Who Makes the NBA I have now just sell catch on like wildfire, but maybe the cover's not exactly right, and maybe I had to change the 30 days thing, and all these things are kind of work, and you don't necessarily want to do more work when you've already worked so hard on your project. So it's very hard, even for a professional data scientist, to allow the data to give you information that you don't want.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind for me that it connects so much for marketers who, as more data comes in, it continually is changing the aperture of the picture. So it's never done and you can continually learn from it. Maybe you could talk a little bit to our listeners about what happens when the data is not as clear. Like, as a data scientist, how do you handle when you're not as clear on what the data might say? What do you do in those instances, or what advice would you give to folks that are dealing with that?
Well, the nice thing, I had a friend who was deciding between going to Harvard or Princeton, and he couldn't make up his mind. He said, I don't know, Harvard offers this, Princeton offers this. And the professor said, if it was an important decision, it would be easy, which is very interesting because it's basically because it's such a difficult decision, it doesn't really matter that much because they're both great schools. So to some degree, if the data is conflicting, if it's moving in different directions, it's very close. It doesn't really, so you don't sweat about it. Okay, well now you don't really need, it doesn't matter as much. If the red version of your copy is winning 51% of the time and the green version is winning 49% of the time, it's not that big a deal. If it's 90% red and 10% green, well, then it's a really important decision. So when it's very important that you get it right, the data will be overwhelming. So I think being comfortable with the fact that, when you have data that, pushes, in a close direction, then just make your decision and move on, basically, I would say. Go with one and move on with your life, and then wait. But then just make sure, the big thing is that when you have one where all the data is pointing very strong in one direction, even a direction you might not have naturally gone, then it's very important that you go with the data in those situations.
That's very practical, very, very helpful.
Earlier on, Seth, you mentioned that a lot of the work you do is not on commercial topics. Outside of the world of business, so in governmental areas or social problems, what's one example of a non-commercial organisation taking a particularly insightful approach to, or a particularly creative approach to their data collection?
I think I've actually seen less in the non-commercial space, interestingly, because I think they move a little slower. The incentives aren't as strong sometimes in those arena. I would say the Obama campaign, I talk about it in Everybody Lies, was very ahead of the curve in using A/B testing, and they really, they really leapt ahead of the other campaigns by they hired some data scientists from Google, from tech companies, and I think that was maybe the best example I've seen in a non business space. But other
I was
examples,
even
yeah,
thinking some of the work that you've done around topics like you mentioned misogyny, using Google search to identify a a preference parents might have for the intellectual development of their boys over their girls, something they would never admit in public, never admit on a survey. But I think your analysis of
yeah, and
search terms has
I,
managed to uncover
I,
some of those truths.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
reached out to some nonprofits, and they weren't really that responsive about using this. So, yeah, I don't know. From my experience, business is a little more forward thinking. I would say a little quicker, a little more rapid, because you
Hmm.
kind of have to be, otherwise, you don't
Yeah.
make profit. So they need to know the new tool, and when Everybody Lies came out, it was a big bestseller, and businesses were just all reaching out to me. Many of them in a panic. They're like, we feel so behind because we know data science is important, and we don't feel like we're doing the best job of it, and they want to catch up really, really fast. And I didn't get the same response from the nonprofit world, a little bit to my chagrin, because I did want to, I wanted to help on some of these issues.
Yes.
Hmm.
Of course.
For people who haven't heard about your data analysis on search terms around is your son gifted, is your daughter gifted, would you
So
précis that very quickly? Yeah.
parents on Google, when they ask, is my son, they're much more likely to ask, is my son gifted? Is my son a genius? When they ask question, is my daughter, it's, is my daughter overweight? Is my daughter ugly? Much more concerned about the physical appearance of their daughters, much more excited about the intellectual potential of their sons. What I like about that study is it's a subconscious prejudice that parents would be otherwise probably unaware of and wouldn't even admit to themselves. So you might have, a son who just happens to be really smart, and you're like, well, of course I'm going to ask if he's gifted. But when we look at everybody's, data, we see that there's this, countrywide or worldwide prejudice against daughters that I think, that was one. Even if nonprofits weren't reaching out, individual parents were reaching out, and they're like, I got to be aware of this, because I also looked at the location of these searches, and the prejudice was just as high in liberal parts of America as conservative parts of America. So I think a lot of people who think that they're, feminists, that they have forward-thinking values, that they wouldn't be subject to these types of prejudices, were convinced by this data analysis that they might have prejudice that they're not aware of, and they're going to think twice about whether they're really thinking about the intellectual potential of their daughters.
It's fascinating. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about how share of search, the percentage of search, leads to uncovering interesting findings. There's a marketing leader, Les Binet. He comes up on our show from time to time, and he has a concept that he's proven through research that if you can increase your share of search, you can increase your market share. So literally, if you have more people searching for you, that it correlates. And Richard, is there anything to add to that? That's the base concept, that the more you increase your share of search, the more you increase your share of market. And I'm wondering...
That's what I think he essentially argues a forward indicator for market share. So it's an interesting way for brands to try and have a live metric that they can look at to get that accurate judgment.
Hearing that, Seth, not sure if you've heard of Binet's theory before. Like, you've dealt with a lot of looking at the trends in search data. Anything come to mind for you when you share that?
It definitely does register, and I've seen studies on this. I'm not sure if I saw Binet's study, but I've seen studies that have shown this, and it gets to the point that there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? Yeah. Because people are searching for you. It doesn't mean they love you necessarily. It just means they've heard of you. I definitely have seen that in my own life. When my second book, Don't Trust Your Gut, came out, I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times promoting my book, and one of the facts in Don't Trust Your Gut is that the typical rich American is the owner of a mid-sized regional business, such as an auto dealership or beverage distribution company. So I go, that's really interesting. So I write in my New York Times op-ed, I didn't know that. I hadn't known that dealer owners were crushing it. And to be honest, I didn't know what a beverage distributor even was.
What?
Yeah. So I write this op-ed, And I'm like, this is a great op-ed. People are, I'm like, this is great. It's great. And I look on Twitter, the first, people are retweeting it. It's the most popular article on the New York Times. It's like, and, it's starting to get a little attention. And within like 10 minutes, it flips to Harvard economist doesn't know what a beverage distributor is, like the basics of the economy. And I go, oh no. And now pretty soon I am going viral as 40 and people started like calling me 40-year-old blogger, 40-year-old Harvard econ PhD blogger, doesn't know basics of economy. They're just like hammering into me. People are looking up my like family history, and it like this is the most attention I've ever gotten in my life, and it is not good attention. And I'm like, and I have somewhat thin skin at points. So I'm just like, oh my God, this is no good. But then I go to my Amazon page, and my book is just blowing up. Like the sales of my book are just exploding because people are talking about my article and my book. So even though it was so negative, it was still leading to sales. And it kind of does show there's no such thing as bad publicity. It was probably good for my overall sales that people, even if people were just saying that I was an idiot, at least people are talking about me. You just need people to know about you in sales. And, whether it's talking about whether you're an idiot, you're smart, whatever it is, at least they're saying something.
Yeah, and maybe in a polarized world, if my enemy says a book is awful, that's a pretty good vindication to me. So there's a comedian in Britain, and he's a very left-wing comedian, so he'd be the kind of strong Democrat, and he's called Stuart Lee. And what he does when he has his tour, he will put amazing reviews from the left-wing press, and then he will, on the other side of his poster, find the most right-wing title. And there's one called the Daily Mail in Britain, and one of the reviews was a slime pit of bitterness, Daily Mail, and he will keep on doing that every tour. He says he puts as much effort into publicising how the right-wing titles hate him as much as the left-wing titles love him. And it's a brilliant technique. I think it would work with either end of the political spectrum, because anyone can say they're amazing, but if you're prepared to say a particular section of society hates you to the remaining group, it's a real costly and credible signal that you are of interest.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a wise strategy. Being controversial, It actually reminds me of dating. This is also in the Christian Rudder book, Dataclism, that he studies who are the most successful daters, and the most successful daters are kind of the conventionally most beautiful people who you think, Brad Pitt, Natalie Portman, kind of just people who everyone says agrees are beautiful. But then like kind of the next level of successful daters are people with extreme looks. So it's heterosexual women who shave their head or dye their hair blue or have wacky glasses. And the reason for this is they're polarizing. So some people rate them a 1 out of 10 and some people rate them a 10 out of 10. But in dating, you'd much rather 50% rate you a 10 and 50% rate you a 1 than 100% rate you a 5. Because you want some people to be really, really, really into you, right? So I think the mistake a lot of people make in dating, if you're not the most conventionally beautiful person, is you try to be, play the conventional game and lean into what makes the average person most attractive. And I think, a better strategy is to be kind of an extreme version of yourself, lean into who you are, freak out a bunch of people, who the hell, in my single days, I'm sure a huge percent of the women I went out with were like, oh my God, this guy is so nerdy. But the women who are into nerds really, really liked me. So I think, you got to be a 10 out of 10 to somebody in the dating market and the business world as well.
It's interesting because Richard and I have talked about in the past, you want to look at the category that your brand's in and find where you can break category convention so that you can be distinct. And you want to break the right conventions. Sounds like, shaving your head going with blue hair are the right category conventions, you could imagine other things they might do that would make them a 0 out of 10 everywhere. So you want your brand to be breaking the right category conventions to make it more interesting, to give you more distinctiveness. And that's an important thing. If it holds true in dating, it holds true in business, it holds true in a lot of areas.
Yeah. And there's a double benefit, and the psychologist's work has come under scrutiny. Not this particular study, but other work has been debunked. But Francesca Gino has this idea of the red sneaker effect, this idea that if you break a convention, it's a way of showing you have status, because people who break conventions and don't have status tend to be punished. So she says it's a credible signal for signaling your status. Now, I've rerun her work in the world of adverts, and you seem to see a similar pattern. So I think there could be another angle for purposely and knowingly breaking some conventions.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's the billionaire who wears a hoodie to the meeting. Everyone's wearing a suit, and the billionaires, you have a panel, everybody's suit and tie, and one person in a hoodie. That person's probably a billionaire.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly, I think, the inspiration for the study, that Mark Zuckerberg turned up to the IPO, I think, wearing red sneakers, whereas, the convention would have been to wear, buttoned, what they're called, brogues or leather shoes. Absolutely.
Yeah, but probably now, after that study came out, or after everyone saw Mark Zuckerberg, now there are all these people fake doing it, and maybe it's no longer true. Maybe it's now it's a lot of
I think the underlying insight might be there is status to come from breaking a convention.
Yeah, but
does dressing down act as a convention breaker any longer? I think what stands as breaking convention, that probably changes and evolves quite quickly over time.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that.
Well, listen, this was great. For us, Seth, just getting together and learning about your new project and hearing about some of the ways that your work connects with brand marketing is a real gift to all the listeners. We always like to end with a fun question, just something to give us a little more insight into you and your world. A favorite thing that you're reading, watching, something that's got you excited right now that you're enjoying. Can you share something with us?
I recently read this one's pretty prominent, but Will Storr's Status Game book it's all about status and how it plays out in life. Yeah, and it starts with this story of a guy who leaves prison, who doesn't want to leave prison because he's high status in prison, and that kind of a Homo sapien would almost be rather high status in prison than low status outside prison. I just thought that was totally fascinating, and kind of goes through, how much status plays a role in how we think about ourselves, and it just really kind of made me rethink a lot of things. So that's definitely something I've read recently that
He did another amazing book called The Science of Storytelling. Not sure if you come across that, but it's amazing. Looking at the psychology of stories, taking lots of findings, lots of experiments, behavioral science or psychology, and then applying them to how you can create a better novel or a better story using them.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll check it out. And then he also has that great. He advertises his cover. He says, the status game in small things, and he says by best-selling author Will Storr in huge letters.
It's giant, isn't it? I think, yeah.
Because
I've seen that every so often. You see someone tweeting a picture of the cover, and it blows up. Yeah. There's that reminds me. There's a Saatchi and Saatchi creative from the 1970s, 1980s, like head creative, called Paul Arden, and his book at the bottom had the world's best-selling book by Paul Arden, and he's kind of dancing this fine line between truth and dishonesty. His argument is, well, look, I said it's my best-selling book. If you happen to have picked it up thinking it's the world's best-selling book, that's on you. But that's quite a clever title with a similar approach.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm in the book selling business, and it is so hard to stand out and get attention. I got a little spoiled. My first book Everybody Lies was just kind of this big hit, and I just assumed that's what happens when you write a book. You just write a book and everybody wants to read it. And I learned with further endeavors that that's not exactly how it works.
There's a lot that, just like in marketing, there's a lot that has to happen at the right moment. It's got to be, it's got to happen at the right time. It's got to have the right things around it. And like most successful people, it's got to have a little luck,
Yeah. Well, the same year Everybody Lies came out, Derek Thompson's Hitmakers came out. And in the middle of that book, he has a story about Bill Haley and Rock Around the Clock. And when it launched, it was a reasonable success, maybe 10 or 50 or 100,000 unit sales. It then drops out of the charts. Film is created, Blackboard Jungle. They can't think of the opening music. I think the person who's in charge asks their son or their daughter what might be, on trend at the moment. They recommend the slightly old now Bill Haley song. It opens the film, and then that just sends it stratospheric. I think it was one of the best-selling singles of the 1950s. Exactly the same products in one, launch. Did quite well, with a little bit of juice behind it. 6 months later, it is one of the best-selling singles ever. So I think, that element of chance is crucial.
Yes, and those are also dangerous stories for creatives like me, because we're always like, we're thinking of getting a normal job. We're always like, well, the thing I wrote 5 years ago, just they make a TV show out of it, then I'll be living on those royalties forever. So
just need hope for it to stumble across a copy, and
you have to be a little careful about these survivorship bias stories.
Well,
right?
Yes, very true. Although there are some, I think Thompson's book's very good at mixing anecdote and data. Yeah. And there are some studies, I think it's Duncan Watts, who tries to create this idea in more structured conditions. So he gets people listening to, this was like data experiment. Early days when you could download songs onto your iPod, people have 50 songs they listen to, and then they can download 5 or 6 at the end of the experiment. And sometimes he doesn't tell people the popularity of the songs. Other times he tells people the popularity, and the hits become much, much bigger. And then the third version, he inverts the popularity. So he says the unpopular songs were really popular. And not only do more people listen to the supposedly poor quality songs, more people end up downloading them as well. So I think there is definitely an element of survivorship bias to the Bill Haley story, but there's some experimental evidence that suggests I think Thompson might be onto something.
No, 100%. And after my second book came out and it wasn't as successful as Everybody Lies, I was whining to a friend. I'm like, this is so unjust. It's so unfair. He's like, in a slightly different universe, nobody heard about Everybody Lies. Like, it could have also come out, during COVID. Like, there are just so many ways it could have.
That's right.
Like, not gotten anywhere. Like, I should be thanking my lucky stars that I at least one time had a book that, hit the zeitgeist like that, and it kind of exploded. So, because there is so much luck that goes into that.
But you cannot create luck without being at the at bat, right? Meaning you gotta keep working to make it happen. Which is a message for all of us. I'm going to bring us to a close, gentlemen, because if I let us, we might talk for another hour. Seth, thanks again for spending time with us today. To everyone listening, feel free to drop us a line on social or visit us on our website. Let us know what you'd like to hear more about. And until next time, I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.